Hello. Today we are going to discuss how a TrueAllele database can identify disaster victims using Kinship DNA. Now, after a mass disaster occurs, there's typically many victims left behind, leaving victim remains. And after the disaster, a number of people are identified as missing. Now, the problem arises in trying to match the victim remains to those missing people, since you don't have any genetic information for the missing people. But you want to compare using their DNA genotypes. Now, from the victim remains, there is biological material that's left behind, and from that material you could produce a genotype. This genotype will typically be single source, possibly degraded. Once you've developed this genotype, it gets uploaded to the TrueAllele genotype database. Now, it's important to note that this is unlike CODIS, which is an allele list database. The TrueAllele database is a genotype database where you will not lose information. So next, we need to identify the missing people. But you don't have the DNA profile of that missing person, so you need to create it by looking at the kinship DNA you collect from family members. So what you'll do is you'll collect the DNA from the family members, produce the genotypes, and upload the genotypes to the database. And what does this look like? Here's an example where we're using the genetic information from one relative. This would be the child of the missing person. Now this picture is showing you at one locus the genotype distribution. Along the x-axis, these are possible allele pairs this individual has at this location, and along the y-axis is the probability for each allele pair. Now, at each location, you're starting with 100 allele pair possibilities. So you could see just with using the information from one child, you've narrowed those possibilities down. This would be analogous to a familial searching. But what happens if you add another relative? Here we're using the child and the mother of the child. You could see that the genotypes have sharpened. Now we're down to even less allele pair possibilities with higher probabilities. So we're getting a more informative profile. This also would be an example of a paternity case. Here you have the information from the child and the mother, and you're inferring the genotype of the biological father. You then compare that to the person you believe to be the father, and the likelihood ratio that's calculated would also be referred to as the paternity index. Okay, what if we want to add two more relatives? Now we've added another child of the missing person and the mother of the missing person. You can see now at this location, there are only 2 possible allele pairs out of 100. So this would be very similar to a typical missing person case. And what you're doing is you're just drawing information from the family members' data that you have. And in order for the database to infer this unknown profile, it takes about 30 seconds. So now that all of the genotypes have been uploaded from the victim remains and from the kinship DNA, the database is going to go through, infer the missing people genotypes, and automatically do comparisons. Now, by uploading genotypes, you're preserving all of the information. You're not discarding any evidence, unlike what happens if you're using an allele database. Now, after these automatic comparisons occur, likelihood ratios are calculated, and given all the specificity and validation studies we've done, there aren't false positives that are created. So now that you've matched the victim remains with the missing people, you need a way to look at them. Here we're looking at the match interface. This is basically just a screen where you can go in and you can query the database to pull down the results you want to see. Now remember, all the comparisons have finished, so you're just using the screen to look at the matches. And you can look at this in any way. You can look for a specific family, you could look for a specific match to one of the human remains, look for it by a certain match strength. There's many possibilities. Now on this next slide, we're looking at the possible match statistics that can be created. On the left side of the screen, you'll see on the x-axis is the log LR, which is your match statistic. And this is basically just showing, depending on the number of relatives you use to infer the missing person genotype, that's going to determine how strong your match statistic is. So if you're using one relative, you have a match that's roughly in the thousands. 2 relatives, you now have a match that's in the millions. 4 relatives, your match goes up to the quadrillions, and 6 relatives, you're now matching in the quintillions, which is essentially a single source match strength. So all in all, no matter the number of relatives you're used, you are able to link the human remains to the missing person, and you're able to provide closure to the families. Thank you for watching.